Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, aka Miss Irene for my young peeps. I am the Bible study teacher. Welcome to Generationally Speaking, the 21st Century Bible Study. Join me each week at the table with my co-hosts from Gen X, Gen Ys, and even some Gen Zs as we discuss life victories, struggles, and the issues, no matter how old we might be, we all face. Today, my co-hosts are Kimberly Leonard. Kim, it's so good to see you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Good to have you back. And Minister James Durham, Cowboy.
How about them Cowboys?
How about them Cowboys? And our special guest today is none other than the Reverend A. Colette Rice. Good afternoon. Reverend Rice is the executive pastor of a mega church in the DMV. For those of you who are outside the area, that's the district of Maryland, Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. So welcome, Reverend Rice.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, so good to be here. So good to have you here. We're going to jump right in today as we continue our discussion on DreamBusters, naysayers, those who try to get in our way, stop us, block us, and guess what? Even ourselves, when we get in our way, we allow the devil to get in our head and keep us from living a victorious life.
Yes, we do.
So Reverend Rice is, I consider as being successful in ministry. So share with us your formative years in Philadelphia. Tell us something about your parents, Ned and Sarah Rice, and your first job in the government. And then tell us how you finally got to full-time ministry.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that covers a long span. But born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I received my early Christian education, certainly the introduction to Christ at 9. I was baptized at 9.
All right, now.
At the Canaan Baptist Church.
Canaan
Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, under the leadership of Pastor Gus Roman. And he's still around. He's pastor emeritus at Canaan still, and just an amazing pastor. It really blessed me. I was sharing with someone yesterday that Canaan was a very progressive Baptist church in a season and in a time where, we were considered to, in some ways, be pulling up the rear in a lot of cases. But even back in the 70s, we had women in ministry.
What?
Yes, we had women in ministry. We had women in key leadership positions throughout the church. We had a youth council, which I was part of. Yeah, I was part of the youth council. So I would like to say that my spiritual maturation and formation, Canaan was very instrumental. Pastor Roman were very instrumental in growing me up, even when, I was pretty, how can I say, rambunctious.
I thought religious.
No, rambunctious. To put it mildly. But even in the midst of me trying to figure out life and figure out all of that, they kept us close. And so I was able to teach Sunday school as a teenager. And like I said, experienced the youth council, serving ministry in a whole host of areas. I led devotion. As a young girl. And so when I look back now over my life, I realized that all roads eventually, were leading up to where I am.
So you were
now.
introduced to leadership very early.
Very early. I didn't know at the time that's what was going on, but
You were being molded.
Yes.
So were your parents, were they in the church or outside of the church?
Yeah, they were in the church.
They were in the church.
Yeah, they were in the church. So my father was at Canaan. He was actually both a trustee and a deacon. I can't remember the order and at which places and times, but he served in both capacities. My mother was a deaconess, ordained.
What?
Yes, Sarah was ordained.
Oh my
She was
goodness.
in the 70s.
In the 70s.
In the 70s.
Wow.
Yes. And so they were very active. Yeah, the whole family was very active in the church. So Sunday mornings in our home, Saturday nights were, about my father was teaching Sunday school.
Right.
So he was studying his Sunday school lesson. He was, all preparing us. I come from that paradigm where we fixed Sunday dinner on Sarah was already, cooking the greens, getting that meat settled. My father cooked as well, so they prepared in order that we might, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy and spend our time with the Lord. And so it was a good experience.
Well, I'm going to help some young people out here who are probably looking on and wondering, with your parents being in the church, does that mean that there's no stumbling?
Oh, Lord. If you all remember the movie Glory, and you remember Denzel Washington when he stood up on the tree and he sang that song, "Oh my Lord, 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 oh my Lord." Well, my father sang that all the time. And usually it was a prayer for his daughter. Yeah, a lot of stumbling.
Yeah, and I think that helps because I think sometimes when parents hold leadership positions in the church, that sometimes church members don't always want to see them as children who are still, being formed, and so they have to make mistakes. They stumble. They never are supposed to live perfect lives as some would want you to think. So I think that helps for our young people who are looking on to let you know, hey, even if your parents in the church, there's still some growing, some stumbling that you'll make along the way. So you're in Philadelphia. So how do you end up in Washington, D.C.?
Well, everybody moved. They left me. Everybody left me. So my brother left to go into the military. And then my father worked for the federal government as well, for the Department of Agriculture, and he left. He got a position. It was a long time because my mother, we had such roots in Philadelphia. We had family in Philadelphia, certainly had settled into the home and had created all of these relationships and of course a tremendous community within the church. So he received, Ned, he wasn't a stagnant kind of guy, and so he got a lot of offers and he turned a lot of them down.
Okay.
Because they couldn't get on one accord about leaving. And so finally she gave in and he got an offer to come to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And so then they moved.
Okay.
And I was still in Philly and pretty much, and then burning the road, hitting the road every weekend because, family means the world to me. And so eventually I said, it's time for me to go. And I applied for a position here with the Justice Department and got hired, and the rest is history.
Okay, so you got hired at the Justice Department, and when you came into that, was that an entry-level position that you started?
Well, no, because I started in federal government really young, which is why I was able to retire when I did, because I started as a part-time position when I was going to Temple. Right. And then the grant, I was an arthritis research grant with the VA hospital. The grant expired, and so I went full-time with the hospital. So I was probably like a 4 clerk, secretary, and so I... how the increments were. Moved up the ranks. The position that I got when I came down here was for a legal secretary. So it was like a 7.
Okay. And then you continued to move up the ranks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you got to a place where you were comfortable in terms of where you were, and you could see your potential. Yeah. But God has a way.
Yeah, He does.
So you were raised in the church, and I'm sure that going to college, you had those times that you enjoyed being on the college campus. I'll put it that way.
Party over here.
But God, you know, what that foundation was there, and that God was right there, and He called you into ministry.
Right.
And you answered that call. Tell us a little bit about that call.
The call was really interesting and somewhat painful because even though I saw a certain model as a child, by the time I got down here and we were more, let's just say Mount Enon was not as progressive when I joined this church. So we kind of went back to the Neanderthal. No, it wasn't that bad, but it was a whole different, it was kind of more Southern, and as there's other terms that have been ascribed to it, but let's just say it was very different.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we were in there together.
Yes.
So we were doing all kinds of things. Like when I was talking to my nephew the other day about finding your gift, and I said it doesn't come to you.
No.
You know what I mean? You just get out there. And once you get out there, you figure out what you can't do. You figure out what you're good at, you figure out what you're not good at. And so you learn by doing. You kind of weed stuff out, and it begins to kind of hone you and steer you to where you need to be. So
you receive your calling.
I received my calling.
And then we wait to be licensed.
Right. Forever.
So in the midst of that process while you were waiting, because you said it was painful almost, how did you handle that pain and frustration in your call and walking into your calling?
Well, I was timid about my calling. I remember really being considered, as characterized as a timid person. But about my calling, it was a struggle for me to process that. Okay. It was a struggle for me to wrestle with the questions that most, say, humble people who are called wrestle with. Can I do this? Can I really me, God?
Exactly.
Me? And so I think that's that processing that. Processing what I had sense enough to know that it would be a major responsibility. Right. And so when you get that, then the question is, not only did you really call me, but can I really measure up to that? Can I do this? So it was a long time. I do remember when one thing about our call, and those of us in this space understand it, is that you can't run from it. Your call insists that you take notice.
Yes.
You can't disregard it. You can try, but it really won't let you. Right. God is continuing to call you. And so for my, I had a conversation. I left church one day and I cried, and I just cried and I cried and I couldn't stop crying. And at the time I was on single ministry, and I went to see Miss Alberta Moore. Yeah. I'll never forget that visit. Yeah. And I was just crying. She was like, Colette, she talked to us, Colette, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know. I didn't know what was wrong. Yeah. Sometimes you can cry and you don't know what you're crying for. And she said, you've been called, haven't you? And that was the first time that it was articulated. And so I said, yeah. And then I left her and I went to see my father. So I got up enough nerve, to say, Daddy, can we talk? And he was like, yeah. And I said, I've been called. And so he said, really? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, Ted, say more. He would make you process things. Tell me more. So I said, I have a call in my life. I believe God is calling me to ministry. And so he said, okay. And so he says, so what are you going to do with that? So I said, well, I trust that, the Lord will make a way. You know how we get, the Lord, you don't know what the way is. He'll make a way. So he said, so how is that? He said, there's not a lot of, I said, I'm going into full-time ministry. That's what I said. I remember.
Wow.
I'll never forget. That was in the 90s.
Wow.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
I said, I'm
That was
going into
risky.
full-time ministry. I sure did. And he said, well, you know, there's not a lot of opportunities for women in full-time ministry.
Yes.
And I said to him that day, there'll be one for me.
Ooh.
And that's all I had, though. That's all I had. And I knew that wasn't me talking. And I'll never forget the words he said to me after that. And this was back in the 90s, so you all will remember to say, you go, girl. That's all he said was, you go, girl. And that was the end of that.
So we thank God that, you know, you got that, you answered the call in your life.
Right.
You move forward, and the licensing process, the ordination process. Now you're on the job. You're licensed, and God now says, I have another door. I have a great door that I'm opening for you. And I want you to walk through it. And walking through the door means leaving what you know is a place of a place that you're comfortable, a place where there are benefits, a place where you know you can be there for 20, 30 years, whatever it might be.
Right.
And walking into something that is totally, it could be risky. It's actually a step of faith.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're going into a private industry, you're moving into this church place where women still is still murky ground for women. And you're being called to be the executive pastor at this church where you already know that there are men and women who don't necessarily receive women as in the ministry. So how do you make that decision now to leave this place where I know I have my benefits and going and stepping out on faith? What is that for you?
Well, that's very interesting. That's really, really good because, as you said, I had tenure in the government, and I was some years away from retirement, and so when I got the call to consider coming to work for the church full time, I knew that was God, because that was manifested 15 years prior when in that conversation with my father. And I was like, here it is, oh my God, here it is. But at the same token, I was not of the age to retire. I wasn't eligible for retirement. Eligible for retirement. And so this was so amazing, and this is how you know. So when I heard it, I was like, this has got to be it. This has got to be God. And then you, of course, immediately go into prayer, because that's what you do. I knew I wanted to go. There was no question in my mind that I wanted to make this move. But could I make the move?
Right.
And it was so crazy. But I called our personnel department. I spoke to Bill Manning. I'll never forget him. It's been 15 years now, but I'll never forget. And Bill said, hell no, Colette, you don't qualify. You don't qualify. You're not eligible for retirement. And then while we were on the phone, he said, wait a minute. He said, I just got an incoming missive. And I'm like, okay. And he said, this is virtually unheard of. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, 25 years. He said because it had just closed, like in the end of the fiscal year. It had closed the end of September. I was reaching in end of October, early November. He said they had just closed this. He said, but they've instituted, the every now and then they would offer these either it wasn't a buyout, but they would offer those every now and then, or early out. And he said this is virtually unheard of, but 25 years at any age.
Holy Spirit.
25 years at any age. I danced like David. I did everything but take my clothes off. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Like, God, you are
awesome.
so much. You are just unbelievable. He did that.
90s and 2000s.
This is 2007. That's when I started working full time. Well, it was actually 2006 because I transitioned in March. Okay. But because it took me probably about 60 days to make the full shift.
So even 2000s, you still part of those who are trailblazing the path for women to be in leadership positions, particularly in big churches.
Right.
Did you have other women in ministry that you look to as a model to try and follow?
Well, Reverend Smith, of course, we were there together, and so I call her. Let me see. What can I? If I was Jeremiah, we call her Peter. Okay. Like she's the one that's trudging into the garden, cutting off the ear, like this is what it's gonna be. We go, that kind of thing. And so she was a source of strength, you know what I mean, in that space. So I would say definitely Reverend Smith. And because she would push me, come on, Cole, we can do this. Come on, we can do, I got that a lot at a time and space where it was very much needed because there was very much warfare. Like nobody knows but Jesus the kind of warfare that we experienced in that season. And every now and then still experience.
And I think I'd like for you to talk to all the other young persons who are going into ministry about, I want this role, but as the executive pastor,
right.
You have an awesome responsibility,
right?
And part of that responsibility, as we've already talked about, is saying no. Now, it's one thing to say no in the business setting, right. But you're in the church,
right.
And here's this young person, and a woman at that, is going to come to me. I've been entrenched in this church for over 50 years, and I'm coming to her, and she's saying no to me. What do you build up inside of you so that when you have to say no and the pushback, because behind doors, church folk ain't always so nice.
Ooh, man, bartering for your head on a platter is what they do.
They come for you. They come for you.
Yeah.
They come privately and they come publicly.
Wow.
So how do you?
We know that.
How do you?
That Saturday.
Yeah. So how do you get to that place where you learn how you have the strength to say no, and you have the strength and the fortitude and all that's necessary to take what comes with that role.
Right. Leadership in the church is like nothing I spent 26, 27 years in the government in leadership positions when you're in administrative positions, you are accustomed, we established guidelines, we enforced procedures, we did all of that. So that for me was common. You know what I mean? However, and it was, as you said, easy to say, no, I'm afraid we're unable to, and it was real easy. It was real easy in the government. But in the church, it's difficult. And it's difficult because it's the same people that on, one side of the house, you're having to, reinforce, guidelines and regulations. I don't like those terms, but let's just say processes and procedures. And you need that in a space such as ours. But on the other hand, you are one of the pastors of the church. Yeah. And so you're still responsible for the discipleship piece. You're responsible for their souls. You're responsible for, their, to some extent, now you can't change. You can encourage a person to help deconstruct wrong thinking, but it's up to that person to get it. And so oftentimes the encounters are a lot about, misunderstanding, wrong thinking. And so it's a lot about relationship. Okay. It really is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you unwind? How do you step away to maintain your own sanity?
Right. I'm really I realize that I can be outgoing sometimes and gregarious sometimes, but I think there's a part of me that's quite introverted. Like as long as I can get my own space and I honor that, you know what I mean? I treasure that. So I find that taking time for myself. And I'm not talking about leisure, but I mean really time to sit, with God, to sit with Colette, you know what I mean? To enjoy Colette, to not necessarily have a whole lot of stimuli, you know what I mean? To move me, but just learning and, to find those places of peace. And then, enjoying family too. I'm appreciating now that mom's gone and dad is gone. I'm really more appreciative. I've always loved family and time spent and all, but now I get it all the more.
As an executive pastor, you have a track record of success. So you had a mega church. And I want you to talk about the tests and the triumphs from taking that church helping to take that church from 2,000 members to 10,000 members. Can you walk us through that process, the tests, and then the triumphs? Because that's a major accomplishment.
Right. It's exhilarating. It's nothing like, even with the challenges and people and all of that kind of stuff, it's just nothing like being a part of kingdom building. And so the progression and the growth is just so amazing. And every step of the way, to see the people come in, to see and to be a part of that through the little church on the side of the road to this quote unquote mega church has just let me know that foundation of love, which we've always had, is really what carries us. Just, true to the hymn, love lifted me, And so I believe that that has been one of the biggest blessings. One of the biggest challenges is keeping up with the growth, because why we really appreciate the times where you can breathe a little bit, because it allows you to, catch up. If you don't keep up with the growth, it can be really exasperating. So you're on all the time. So that, I think, for me, the biggest challenge is being on all the time.
All right. So I want to leave our audience with Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plan to give you hope and a future."